Hey guys, hope you're doing well. It's Fran here. So back with the live deadline stream and here to kind of look at what the sort of ramifications are of some transfers this week. I know a lot of people are looking into transferring Salah, but the options really depend on sort of what chips you have in play, and I can definitely see some people maybe taking that sort of brave step towards going for United players because they have two great back-to-back games with Everton and Norwich. Two players, or two teams rather, who have had extremely poor defensive stats as of late. Norwich obviously noticeably conceding the most amount of goals scored this season. And then with Everton, you have a team that seems to be performing worse and worse, regardless of the defense personnel that they have, especially under Frank Lampard. But I would also say Everton have actually had some strange results where after a particularly poor result, I feel like they have stepped up quite a bit in back-to-back games. So my sort of recollection of the Man City Everton game is a good example of that. I don't know how you guys feel personally about that, but good to see Henry in the chat. Nice to see you. Do you guys have any kind of questions today before I head towards Twitter? Or maybe I'll actually start adding some Twitter questions before we get back to other things. In terms of my own team, I've made a simple transfer out of Tierney. I had enough money in the bank to go out of Tierney. Reece James actually did get a price rise. I missed that just because I wanted to be sure whether he could play, and it seems like there's a high likelihood he will be playing. He looked very good in the Real Madrid game, even though that was overall a very poor Chelsea performance. I think that some of the personnel in the back will change, but I think Reece James was one of the bright spots in that team alongside Mount and Havertz, and I imagine that those three players will probably be the interesting assets to own from Chelsea going forwards, alongside the kind of staple, tried and true Rudiger. So that's kind of how I view things. I do think James has quite a bit of upside over Van Dijk this week, so Van Dijk is going to be that person who goes towards the bench for me. I just think that in the midfield, I've got much better games. I'm kind of hoping that Barnes starts and there isn't any lesser rotation. As far as Spurs, we're quite comfortable in knowing, I would say, that these players have the full faith of Conte and that they will start, so no issues there. And unfortunately, I don't have many options replacing Weghorst, who hasn't looked very lively lately. So the option would have been to go for Dennis, but he himself is in a similar predicament and has already kind of been deposed into the bench. And for that reason, I think I still probably will go for Weghorst, even though I imagine his ceiling really is 2 points. I think I'm talking between two players who are probably going to be owning 2 to 1 points. Van Dijk, I don't really see him scoring a goal, and I do see City scoring two. So that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in. As far as Twitter, let's have a look at Twitter today just to see how people are kind of responding. So Mio says, who should I bring in? Planning on free hitting in the big double game week. So I imagine big double game week meaning 33. So he's got Tierney here, so I think there is an opportunity to go into James. I really like his midfield. And then the forwards this week, I really don't think there's too much of a need to go into a forward. You have the doubles from Southampton quite soon. I would probably try to go out of one of the defenders. And if you're free hitting in double game week, you don't really worry about the fact that Reece James has a single game in the subsequent week. I think Reece James is probably one of the keepers towards the end of the season. Manish says, replacement for James, you should sell Rafinha for Bowen. I mean, I'm not really sure about selling Rafinha for Bowen. Rafinha has a good game this week. He's playing versus Watford, even though Watford did look quite defensively good versus Liverpool. And the thing about Bowen is he has two good games, but he has a single in 33, so not too much upside compared to some of the other midfielders in Leicester and Arsenal. And then for me, Rafinha leaves next week so that he gets replaced by someone like Saka/Madison. What do you mean by replacement for James as well? And nice to see Captain Marbles in the chat. Hope you're doing well. Rajan says he's done Tierney to Fofana as they have a few double game weeks. That's very fair. And Jack says he's used 2 free hits, or he has 2 free hits and a bench boost. When should you use? I mean, I think in that situation, Jack, I think the staple sort of move would be to go for a free hit in 33, a 3 hit in 37, and then a bench boost in 36. However, everything is going to be team dependent for you, so I would say maybe take a look into game weeks like 35, or 34 even, because you have the opportunity to maybe go for a free hit that is a little bit alternative. So if, let's say, you can try and set your team up for one of the free hits naturally, such as 33 or such as 37, then you could clearly play around maybe free hitting on a week where not many people will be competing with the free hit, because everyone has sort of saved their last free hit this season for 33 and 37. The competition might not be very high and the ceiling might actually not be as high as we expect. So maybe saving one of your free hits for one of those off weeks, for example 34, would be quite interesting. Who would I start out of Dubravka and Sa? I'd probably still start Sa, but I think it's why would I replace James, Manish? And I think Bowen is a little short term, and I don't have a wild card for 34, so not exactly a move I'd love to go for. He also just played, so I think he might. I mean, I wouldn't say he necessarily needs rest, but that's going to be a detrimental factor where I think his minutes could be affected. Maze, so back again, sitting on one free transfer, 0.4 in the bank, anything you would do, correct captaincy, correct goalie to start. So you chose between Dubravka and Sa. I personally would go with Sa, but it's up to you who you choose. I just think that Wolves have been a slightly better defense. I don't think there's a bad option. From Newcastle, I really only really like Shar from a defender point of view. But in terms of the team, I think you've actually played it out correctly. I think Broja and Tierney, of course, there's nothing you can do about that. And then in terms of the captaincy, it's probably between Kane, Salah, and Saka in your team. And I think Saka's the huge differential there. But I was quite dismayed with Arsenal and the sort of impacts of their injuries, as well as Tierney's absence. So that for me, in terms of Partey, how that affects the midfield for Arsenal, I think that's quite significant, because you will be looking at an Arsenal team that might have to have Granit Xhaka, deputizing at left back because Nuno isn't playing particularly well. And that kind of leaves a big hole in the midfield where, with Partey potentially injured for a few weeks and Granit Xhaka not being able to play there, you'll have sort of Sambi Lokonga slotting in back into the team. And even if Nuno starts, I think that does sort of hamper the way Arsenal build up from the back and how that contributes to how many attacking returns they can produce. And that's kind of the worrisome factor there. So it's up to you whether you choose between that. I think you've got it correct though. I think Kane is simply one of the best options this week alongside Son, and there's nothing from recent memory to sort of tell us that Spurs shouldn't do poorly versus Aston Villa, because this Aston Villa team has also conceded quite a few amount of goals as of late. So I think there's nothing really too much to do there. I think you've made the right moves. 2 free transfers. Planning on doing Jimenez to Mateta or Cucho. Should I roll the other transfer or transfer Marcel or Itinerary out for Doherty? I like the Doherty transfer this week. I wouldn't probably use both of my free transfers. What I will say though is, I guess if you're free hitting in 33, it makes sense to keep Coutinho in your team. As far as Rafinha, that's similar logic there, but I would probably like to make a midfield transfer if possible, because Rafinha clearly is someone you'd like to save a transfer for maybe next week. If let's say you use one transfer this week, you could move out of Rafinha, who has a blank next week, and Coutinho, I guess you'd probably like to keep him towards the end of the season. So if you want to avoid that sort of transfer, I'd probably make the Jimenez to Mateta move this week. I also think Pukki is going to be quite a good option if you're going to move out of Rafinha. Yeah, so I think that makes sense. I think you either move into Mateta or Pukki, but it's not necessary to make that move. And I think maybe when we're talking about ceilings, I think Doherty actually has a higher ceiling than Ait Nuri. So you might want to take Ait Nuri out or Marçal out for Doherty. I think that would make a lot more sense for me, just so you can move Jimenez later, because I would much rather have, let's say, Doherty this week than Mateta, if we're being honest, and then you can save your other transfer. Jack Tatum, St. Maximum or Mateta for Watkins? I'd probably go for Mateta. Lukaku doubt makes it pretty safe. Yeah, I think Lukaku just hasn't showed much form. I think even when he came on as a substitute versus Real Madrid, he missed quite a clear chance from the headers. And once again, this Chelsea team really has struggled to play together with Lukaku, and maybe that's Lukaku's fault. Maybe that's something to do with management, but he's definitely struggled to sort of gel with his team, and I think it doesn't make sense to own him. As far as going back to the chat, would I start Dubravka? Who would I start of Dubravka and Salah? Yeah, so I've responded to that. Hey, Leanne, hope you're doing well. Sup, Fran in chat. Hope you're doing well, Sad. User 158, thoughts on Salah to Bruno plus captaincy on Bruno. I like that move. That was actually one of my moves in my mind this week, where I was thinking between either I would have gone for, let's say, Van Dijk / Tierney and moved into Reece James, or I would have actually gone for Salah to Bruno with the sort of view in mind of having Bruno as a captaincy option for the next 2 weeks. What concerns me slightly about Bruno is maybe the impact of Ronaldo and how positionally that would change. Obviously, there's been games where we've seen Ronaldo and Bruno both haul. For example, the Brighton game is a good example where Bruno scored or had 2 chances to score and then ultimately scored in the last minute. Ronaldo also scored outside of the box in that game. But Ronaldo becoming the focal point United does, in my opinion, sometimes take away from Bruno and how effective he is as an asset. A little bit different from the way that Kane and Son operate, as an example. But I still like the move this week, especially if you don't have any other problems in your team. So that's really up to you. The one thing I'll say, of course, is that a lot of people are looking towards that Liverpool versus Man United game, and they do think that it's a very, very good single game week where Salah has a chance to contribute there. So I would think wisely about that sort of move and how that kind of pans out for your team. Bruno, for me, has less permanence in your team. He's someone you probably would still look to transfer towards someone like a Kevin De Bruyne. But as a short transfer, I think Bruno does make sense, and I think it's a very, very valid move. Thoughts on Jimenez to Nacho and Cash to Doherty? I love Cash to Doherty. As far as Jimenez to Nacho, I think I probably would sidestep that move. I think there is a chance that Nacho could be rested. I'd rather go for that move in Gameweek 33 if we really wanted to go for that gamble, because I at least have the security of maybe him starting one game, and we have a little bit more news and understanding of Vardy's injury and what's sort of going on there. Blair says, hey, Fran, thanks for the show. Any Leeds fans in here? Gelhardt versus Greenwood. Is Greenwood in favor after last week? Just filling a budget slot. I think Greenwood seems to be in favor, but it's a weird one because I think I remember in the first game in charge of the Marsh, we actually saw Gelhardt come off the bench and then also score. But then since then, we've also seen Greenwood play. And I feel like we just haven't had enough of a sample size under the management of Jesse Marsh to really know exactly what he's looking for in a player. So I would actually probably... I would pick one of them and just kind of be done with the decision. I like Gelhardt just because he's more explosive. So even though he has less minutes, ultimately you're looking at someone who probably has a chance to score a goal. Whereas maybe Greenwood within the same amount of minutes might not be able to produce anything. And that's pretty much been the case this season. Gelhardt has scored with very, very few minutes and has been a great super sub. Rudiger to James being worth it? I would say probably not. Rudiger is someone who always looks to score and looks to create chances himself, and I think it's not really worth that sideways move this week. In fact, if I could try double up on Rudiger and James, I would actually try to do so. Start Cucho or Martinelli? I'd probably start Martinelli. Leanne says, humor me, if you had a choice between going for Jota or Diaz, who would you favor? That's an interesting choice, and maybe I'm sensing that you're moving away from Salah. I'd actually probably pick Diaz. I think he's been exceptional, and I think it's a tough move, but I do think that Diaz is someone who is a little bit more consistent than Jota. But Jota has that chance of being explosive from game to game because I think his actual movement is very good, whereas Diaz is someone who I would say is very hard to sort of defend. He's unguardable in that sense. I think I'd probably just play with Diaz because he has slightly better form. Whether you'd actually go for it this week, though, is another question. I would say I'd probably not be tempted to mess around with either Jota or Diaz for now. I'd much prefer a punt towards the direction of someone like, if let's say you had a wild card to play, or you were looking for a much more long-term move, then I would actually move towards a Chelsea midfielder this week. Something like a Havertz, who's someone who's been showing a lot of form for the back half of the season and has great games in hand and doesn't have the sort of issue that Jota and Diaz have, which is rotation. But once again, it really depends on what chips you plan on playing and things like that. Jay Wavy says, will Ake start against Liverpool? Does anyone know? I don't think so. I think the preferred lineup probably is going to include Stones, but I really can't confirm that for you. Salah to De Bruyne, Rafinha to Zaha, and Tierney to Doherty will be taking -8. I like Tierney to Doherty. I don't really like the other moves, if I'm going to be completely honest. I don't really like Salah to De Bruyne this week. I like it in a different week where they're not playing versus each other. We know Salah's very capable of scoring versus City, even though he's out of form. And I know whilst De Bruyne's in form, ultimately he's still playing versus a very capable Liverpool team that have been very defensively resolute, and it takes a lot to score in that game. Sometimes the individual moments will come from random players. So in previous years, we've seen someone like Foden do exceptionally well in that game. Rafinha to Zaha, I still think that that's a move you want to delay until game week 34. If you look at the way the fixtures pan out for Crystal Palace, they don't have a double in game week 33, so I'd much rather move out of Rafinha to someone else in game week 33, and then maybe move someone else in your team midfield wise outside of Zaha. As far as Marquichu, thoughts on Barnes or Maddison to transfer in? I would probably transfer in Maddison. I just think he's a little bit more explosive, and even though the underlying stats actually favor Barnes, which is actually what made me go for Barnes, sometimes the eye test does tell you that Maddison is a little bit more of a hidden gem, in my opinion, where he can score from so many different sort of ranges of scenarios, whereas Barnes does need to sort of score through open play. Maddison is someone who's very capable of scoring, with 3 kicks and things like that. Son or Kane for captain, Virgil van Dijk, Dalot, or Kilman. I'd probably play Virgil van Dijk, and then I'd play Kane as my captain. I might consider playing Dalot there, actually. Leeds fan here, unclear at the moment, mate. Yeah, that's fair enough, Ben. Thanks. I think the weird situation, of course, is simply that Gelhardt has been a promising youngster, but, I mean, they just don't get enough minutes, and I feel like that sort of forward position you're probably putting towards the back of your bench, but I hope you make the right call there. It is a good week for punts, though, absolutely. I think, for example, people have been looking into Bowen as a punt, especially if you're wildcarding in 34, as Saad mentioned. James says, which 2 players would I bench out of Trent, Robertson, Cancelo, Thiago Silva, Kulusevski, Cucho, Weghorst? That's a lot of players that I would love to play. I'd probably definitely play Kulusevski. I probably would play Weghorst over Cucho. Just because I think Watford don't really create as many chances as... Okay, that's actually tough. I can't say the same thing about Burnley because they really are very poor in creating chances themselves. Maybe I'd actually start Cucho then. I'd start maybe Cucho... If you had to start a forward, then I'd probably start Cucho and Kulusevski, and then I'd play Cancelo and probably play Trent. Or Cancelo and Thiago Silva. I'm a little bit more confident. If the game was to actually be low scoring, I think I'd back City to actually be the one keeping the clean sheet. Leanne says, you're keeping Salah, no plans to get rid there. Fair enough. Nuclear Adams, greetings. Hope you're doing well. Rafinha or Mateta, I'd probably... I mean, what do you mean by Rafinha or Mateta? Are you looking to bring in Mateta on a transfer, or do you already have Mateta on your team? Because I feel like I'd definitely rather play Rafinha this week over Mateta. Which 2 to start of Mateta, Rudiger, and James? I'd probably start Mateta and Rudiger and James, to be quite honest. Bench Cancelo or Trent? I'd probably bench Trent if you really had to make it between them. Should I sell Salah for Son? I probably wouldn't do that. I have Son in my team. I have Salah on my team. Not exactly looking at getting them out immediately. I think the only upside really comes from Bruno, who has a much quicker double game week. And if there's not a reason to kind of move Salah for someone who plays 2 games, then I don't think there's a reason to move Salah at all. Thoughts on Robbo to Reece James? I think that's a good move if you have another Liverpool player in your team already in terms of defenders. James in, Cancelo out. I wouldn't do that move. I tried to get both in. Kilman and Mount to Doherty and Fernandes for -4. I actually do like those moves, but I'm not too sold on getting out of Mount for now. I think the game versus Southampton is still a good game for Mount, but if you absolutely have to actually go out of Mount to go to Fernandes, then that's fair enough. Which one do I go for, form or fixture? It's a bit of both, actually, because, I mean, ultimately, it's not like everyone either has form or fixture. You always have to sort of balance both. I personally prefer going for form in terms of how I pick players, but then in terms of how I actually end up... I guess my form list is, or my list of players is based on historic form, really. And then I'm looking towards fixtures more so to actually deliberately play players in specific weeks. Salah to Bruno and Bruno back to Salah for game week 34. That's possible. I also think I'd like to raise that Kevin De Bruyne is a very good option too, Dr. Malcolm, if you're really going for Salah to Bruno. But Salah to Bruno seems to be a very popular choice this week. I'm not going to go for that move this week just because I kind of like the captaincy on Son. If I go out of Salah to Bruno, it might be next week where I do so. But I still probably think I might have to sidestep the Man United players. Probably will actually skip them Hope that they have another poor performance for Norwich, which actually did happen already once this season. Maybe hoping for twice could be possible. And then I actually would prefer getting Saka into my team and getting Rafinha out of my team. Bench 2 out of Robbo, Doherty, Martinelli, Weg. I'd probably bench Weghorst for sure. Yeah, I think you've got the bench right, to be honest. It's a tough choice with Martinelli, but I think the benching last week is sort of what calls to me to go for that. This project is retired. Hi, Fran. Hope you're well. Planning on rolling the transfer. What's your thoughts on the lineup slash bench? I like the lineup. Bench wise, it's of course it's a tough one, but I think you've actually got it right. I think the captaincy's right as well, and it's always very hard to bench a premium such as Cancelo and Trent. So I think you've done the right thing there. So Manish says he. I wouldn't sell Bowen because I think he's been in very, very good form. And Rafinha also blanks next week, Manish. I don't know if you were aware of that. So I wouldn't go into Rafinha this week. I would actually be very happy with going for Bowen. And I wouldn't replace James at all. In fact, I think you could actually roll your transfer, Manish. That's kind of the situation I find myself in. If anything, I'd replace Mope. I'd probably replace Mope for someone like Mateta or Pookie. I think a lot of people have been looking at Mateta this whole time, but Pookie for me is a great option in terms of forwards who also will double in the near future. So yeah, that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in. I'm going to free hit next week. So would you do Tierney to Reece James or Jimenez to CR7 or something else? Jimenez to CR7 is a great move. I'd love that move. Absolutely, if you're going to free hit as well. Thinking Salah to Bruno and should White start over Barnes even though you already have Ramsdale? I like Barnes over White. I think we really did see a collapse of the Arsenal defense, and I'm not really sure how they recover in terms of personnel. I think also if you're not going to play Barnes this week, I don't know if you're going to play Barnes at all. I think this is a good week for Barnes to be played. So I would definitely think about going for Barnes. As far as the sort of rest of your team and the idea of going for Salah to Bruno, I think you have to kind of recognize that it is a big gamble. But for me, it does pay out quite well for people who look towards, let's say, free hitting in 37, because for United, their recent games in terms of the run between 33 to 36 is actually very good, and also 32, right, where we have the game versus Everton. So if you're looking towards going for Bruno now, I think it's a very logical choice. But you are banking on basically that Salah won't be able to reclaim his form, which I think he actually very much is possible of doing, or capable rather. Start Shar or Rams? I'd probably start Shar. I'm gonna sell Rafinha next week. It's been a minute, mate. No transfer plans this week. You're rolling. Just thought I'd show you my team. Yeah, that's fair enough. Nice that you actually have Matip. I imagine you probably picked up a lot of points with that sort of differential pick. I can't believe Matip has really kind of matched Robertson and Van Dijk in terms of points and actually superseded them. So that's great for Matip. Interesting that you have Coutinho. I imagine you probably have like a 3-hit 33 type team, right? Or what are your kind of plans going forward? Because I'd just like to know what you'd like to do with Rafinha and Coutinho in 33. But I think this is a very sensible week to roll. Will says, does he maximize the bench boost by wildcard 34 and bench boost 37? Or do you maximize wildcard by 33? This is what my potential bench boost 33 could look like with a -4. I mean, Bowen's a good individual game. Laporte's a great game, of course. A lot of good single game weeks, and that's kind of like the beauty of going for the bench boost in 33. St. Maximin's an interesting one. Not so sold about Foster. I think the keepers, I mean, that's a low ceiling in general. Weghorst, a little bit of a low ceiling. I feel like the sort of benefit of going for that wild card in 34 is that with 36 or 37, you have enough time to sort of watch the forwards and sort of change them up. I feel like recently we haven't seen much form from St. Maximin and Weghorst, and that's kind of what worries me about the team. At the same time, though, if you get to bench boost earlier, I suppose you can dead end your team and no longer plan for a bench boost, which is also going to be the huge benefit there. You can go for these Newcastle players, go for the gamble, and then you no longer have to look at these players ever again and maybe gamble on these in these sort of teams that are much more less consistent than, or much less consistent than players from Liverpool, City, and Chelsea. So yeah, Foster should go to Schmeichel, but then you'd still have Dennis over ASM. That's a weird one. Yeah, I like Schmeichel. I think the one thing that I'm worried about with this play is, so what happens if Leicester do well? Wouldn't you put yourself in quite a weak position? It seems like you don't even have a good coverage of Leicester, and you're taking hits to get to a position where you're maximizing on Newcastle. Do you think there's a way that you can maybe capitalize on Leicester as well? Because if you could do that, then I think maybe you'd find yourself in a better position. ASM could be Iheanacho. I mean, yeah, that's a possibility too. I guess the worrisome thing about Iheanacho is he probably has the less sort of nailed minutes. But Daka himself necessarily hasn't gotten minutes himself, so that's a possibility too. I think you could go in Archer, and probably that would give me a little bit more faith over say Maximum. But I agree. Yeah, you've made the same point there as well. I'm just not sure he starts both, and that's very true. Um, Black Scorpion. So he's two free transfers. Who should you bring in? Um, I think everyone thinking about transfers this week has to think about their chip plans. So if you're sending me questions, I think kind of letting me know what your future plans are in the future roughly would be a good idea. Yeah, Tomiyasu is someone you should sell actually, Manish, because it doesn't seem like he'll be fit anytime soon. Just going back to YouTube chat though. Um, So some people were actually were asking questions about would I start Mateta over Trent and slash Cancelo, and honestly I would say no. I think the premiums are someone that or people that you need to play. I'm not hugely fond of, let's say, going double Liverpool defense this week. So if that is a situation that you do find yourselves in, maybe I'd like to try to change, which is why I've gone Van Dijk on my bench. Did I transfer? Yes, I did. I went Tierney to James this week because of the injury. Opinions on a free hit for Game Week 34. As I mentioned, for people who do have two free hits, it is a very good opportunity to actually go for a free hit in Game Week 34. So I absolutely agree that it is a good free hit week, especially as a differential. People have two free transfers locked on Cash Doherty and need a Jimenez replacement for this week. Planning, I think a Jimenez replacement is quite good to go for Pookie, to be quite honest. Jay Wavy says, when will be the best time for bench boost? Once again, everything is dependent on your team. So let's say if you can set your bench boost up for 36, then it's a great opportunity there. Even 37 could arguably be a good week. It really just depends on your team. I would say just look at your team in terms of future planning. Like go on websites such as FPL Team or FPL Review. Have a look at what your team could look like by the time it hits 36, 37. Have a comparison with weeks like 33 where you have a double game week, and then make a decision there. Another thing about bench boosting too is you have to think about all the transfers that you make towards a bench boost could cripple your team for the future. So bench boosting early is sometimes beneficial because you don't have to deal with bench boosting dilemmas. Bench Weghorst or TTA. I guess you mean Trent Alexander-Arnold. I'd definitely bench Weghorst. Dr. Malcolm, thanks for the help. Thank you for joining. Cucho or Rafinha, I'd probably play Rafinha. I did recover well from COVID. I still have a bit of a dry cough, but here we are. Doubling City defense after Game 32. Very, very logical music mania. I agree with you. Tierney and Coutinho out for Madison and James. Very, very good moves, Prabhat. I think those are good moves. Captain Kane or Rafinha. Absolutely add Captain Kane over Rafinha. Start two from James or Cody or Shar. I would probably do James and Shar. What do I think about Bowen captain? Huge differential. I think that would be quite beneficial. Hey Jerome, I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining the live stream. Haven't seen you in a while either. Unfortunately, I was sick last week, so back this one. Bench Van Dijk or Weghorst. I'd probably actually bench. I'd bench Weghorst, to be honest. I think Weghorst has been so poor. I only have Weghorst starting in my team just because I have to start him. if I had an option to maybe actually play 5-5-0, just like Atletico Madrid versus Man City, I probably would. What do I think about Bone captains? Yeah, as I said, it's a very good captaincy. Doherty or Silva? I'd probably play Doherty this week. Broja replacement? I'd probably only look at replacing Broja after game week 33. I mean, at the end of the day, he does double. But if you are planning on free hitting in 33 and you don't really plan on playing Broja in the future, then I think Pookie and Mateta are your best replacements. Start two, Doherty, Weghorst, and Robbo. I'd probably start Doherty and Robbo. I think Weghorst has been terrible. Would bench boost be good now? I think if you think that you don't have to take too many hits to have a decent bench boost and you think people have good fixtures, then yes. Bone captain. I like it. Rudiger or Romero? I'd go Rudiger. I think Romero hasn't contributed too much in terms of attack. I think he scored once. And ultimately, Rudiger is someone who actually does contribute quite a lot to attack. He does take a lot of shots on target each game. Yes, it's only taken the entire season for him to get that long shot goal, but he does try and find lots of ways to contribute there. And I think he's much more of an aerial presence than Romero himself. Jerome, so I'll have a look at your questions. So you plan to have 2 free transfers by game week 33, continue to Barnes, Matip to Cancelo, and Raf to Elise. Palace is very easy fixtures game week 3. Yep, I agree. Game week 33 going forward, and you expect Elise to hold in the 7 games left. You also plan to use your last free hit in double game week 36. I mean, that's fair enough. Thanks for your plans. As far as, yeah, the rest of your team, I can understand why you've gone for that, and definitely backing Crystal Palace over their run of games post 34 and onwards is something I'm looking towards myself. Black Scorpion 0.4 in the bank, free hit 33/37, bench boost 36. Right. I guess in that case, if you are free hitting, I do like going for James. I mean, Cancelo for me is one of those options you have to think about bringing back into your team, but James has the better fixture this week if we're just talking about this specific week. As far as if you do plan on free hitting in 33, you could obviously go for some sort of 1 week punt as well. But you don't have a wild card, so that person has to have a little bit more permanence in your team. You could also think about changing one of your forwards. I think this is a good time to replace Jimenez too, and maybe drop someone like Saiss. A good example would be maybe going from Jimenez to... I mean, you could actually play Saiss. Robertson is someone who I'm not too fond of playing, but I think he's a premium as well, so you kind of have to stick him on your team. In this case, I'd actually probably look towards replacing Jimenez with someone like Pukki or Mateta this week, and maybe rolling your sort of second transfer so that you're better placed to maybe actually avoid the free hit in 33, and therefore you can actually free hit in 37. Pablo, any thoughts? Let's have a look at your bench. Yeah, that's the right bench order. Very good team, and I like the fact that you have Tony as well, so that's going to be a huge differential. Yeah. You still have 1 free hit and the bench boost. When would you recommend me to use it? I think 36-37 is the most logical recommendation. I'm starting to become more in that sort of camp where I'm a little bit against the game week 33, just because the single game week games are such a huge differential against people who are going to be opting for players from Burnley or even Newcastle as an example, and even Arsenal, which could be a team that will find themselves struggling. I feel like, for example, with Arsenal, I no longer want to go for 2 Arsenal defenders. I'm pretty content with owning Ramsdale, so that's kind of the position that I find myself in. Jerome says, he was stupid last week and didn't captain your only doubler in Richarlison, but this week you have no idea what to do at all. You want to go Raf to Cornet to set up for a Laurent to upgrade later, but you don't see anywhere else you want to go. That's fair enough. I mean, let's have a look at your team. I think so the reason why your team is a little bit stuck is it's almost like you're a few weeks ahead of the curve with going for 3 Chelsea players, and that's kind of stockpiled a lot of cash into your team. Not to mention that you have 2 of those sort of players between the Mount and Foden range, which kind of precludes you from going for players like Maddison, because I can see with Cornet, for example, he can't be a straight transfer for Maddison, which is a little bit worrisome. I think you just have to bite the bullet and go out of Vardy, to be honest. I think Vardy is actually holding up a lot of money in your team, and you don't have any kind of Spurs players, which is really worrisome for me. I think that's kind of the situation you find yourself in. I think Game week 33, you might be happy to go without Spurs players, but that is for me the main concern there. Maybe going out of Vardy if the injury news doesn't seem to be good, based on the pressers, would be a logical choice. Because if you downgrade Vardy to someone in the midfield, such as a Son in the future, or having the space to go for Son, or even for Bruno, for example, let's say a -4 this week, where you go out of Vardy, maybe go for Bruno, and then replace Vardy with a budget forward, you might find yourself to be in a position where I feel like you would be a little bit more ambidextrous in the future. That's kind of the position I feel like you're in, and you have too many players who are in the 7.5 plus range. Like, you have 3 players, including Richarlison, which I feel like when you compare it to other team structures, a lot of people who've gone big at the back probably have something like a 5-4-1, and that's the main difference in terms of how they're getting players like Kulusevski in their team, or players like Saka. You have to take loads of hits to get rid of him, though. Can't you just go for a 4.5 forward and then maybe just move away from whoever Cornet would be replacing? Because I feel like, let's say if you go for someone like Gelhardt and just, take it on the chin and just know that Gelhardt doesn't play anymore, you kind of have Bruno back. And also, I feel like you're waiting for Vardy for multiple weeks on end. I mean, you've probably waited 3 weeks now, going on to your fourth. He clearly isn't providing any value in your team, and ultimately he's taking around 11% of your transfer value. So that's the tough situation I feel like you're finding yourself in, and you just have to kind of bite the bullet because you've made that wrong transfer, if that makes sense. Thanks, Black Scorpion. Hi, Fran. Hope all good. Hope the same for you. You plan to get Madison in and continue out for Game Week 33. Do I have a better idea? You've got 1 million in the bank. So I would actually say, yeah, Madison in, continue out is very logical. I would maybe consider Saka as well. But as I've been sort of telling people, I think we have to watch Arsenal this week and kind of see how they're doing as well, just so we can kind of contextualize whether they're doing well. Bro, your replacement, I would say Mateta or Pookie. Pope or Dubravka. I'd probably play Dubravka this week. Rudiger, Romero. Rudiger. Start Dennis or Tony. I'd start Tony for sure. Sell Rudiger to Reece James if you already have Thiago Silva. I don't really like that move. I think Rudiger plays more games than Thiago Silva towards the end of the season. As far as Watkins, I like him, but I feel like he's overpriced, and you want to be replacing him with forwards who double in the future. You quite like the idea of a less optimal bench boost in 33, as it means that you can have a 3.9 keeper on a wild card, etc. Free hit 36 to remove triple Spurs too. Exactly, Willwood. I really agree with you, because for me, as someone who's owning triple Spurs, I feel like, yeah, going for that free hit towards the end of the season will be a benefit. Did you make a mistake buying Daka? Potentially. I feel like the issue with Leicester this season is that sometimes if you watch Brendan Rodgers, he clearly sees opportunities for someone like Barnes to even play in forward or central positions, and maybe he can go strikerless at times, and that's kind of the worry with going for players like Daka and Iheanacho. How's your day, Bryn? Do you think you should go Salah to Bruno? I think it's a great choice this week. As far as should you do it, I think it's a complete 50-50. I think it's a very risky move, and I think it will benefit people who are brave. Great to see you back. I personally was actually juggling between that move the entire day, but I've actually opted to go away from that move. I've gone for James. Great to see you back. Thanks, Connell. Hope you're feeling better. Yes, I am indeed. Would you start Sice or Coutinho? I'd probably start Coutinho. Salah to Kane for a -4, because I think, as we've said, so this Spurs team have actually been very capable of scoring goals. At the same time, though, they haven't been exceptional in keeping clean sheets. I wouldn't say their defensive numbers are anything near elite, so I would be quite confident going for Coutinho. I think there's always a little bit more upside going for someone like Coutinho, and we know that this Wolves team have dropped off a little bit in terms of defense. Salah to Kane for -4. I'm not a huge fan of doing that for a -4. No. You want to sell Tierney and Coutinho, but you don't know who to buy. I think selling Tierney, you could, for example, you could look to downgrade someone like Tierney. You could go Coutinho to Madison or Saka. Those sorts of players will be beneficial because they play a double game week in 33. As far as Tierney, you could downgrade him simply to someone like White, because that would just basically reproduce the same asset for you in terms of an Arsenal defender. Or you could actually look towards someone like Fabian Schär, who also double game weeks in 33. William says play Cody or buy White for Tierney. I kind of like White for Tierney, but it depends on if you have Rams as your keeper. As I was kind of saying in the stream, I think you want to have Ramsdale or Tierney, or White, sorry. So just one Arsenal defender. I'm not a huge fan of having two. Thoughts about Newcastle? I think they've actually dropped a little bit off. They had a hot start with Eddie Howe, but I think they haven't been very consistent in terms of keeping clean sheets. They have been okay in scoring goals, but the problem is there's no clear talisman within this team. I think Fraser is, a creative sort of hub for the team, but I think the only option I'd really like to go for in terms of Newcastle punt wise is going to be Fabian Schär for a while. Start Weghorst or Cucho. Probably Cucho just based on form. Weghorst has pretty much the antithesis of form. Jerome says you haven't bench boosted yet, and you still have your second free hit. Tanking to forward position might hurt me later, I feel. Um, I think I think one of the 7.5s have to go if you don't really want to reduce, Vardy into a 4.5 asset. Basically, you have too many semi premiums in your team. Mount, Foden, Richarlison. Most people only have one or two of those types of assets. If we include Trent as an example, and then Robertson is towards the lower end in terms of 7.3 for the people who are holding three of them. You're in a unique position where you actually own four of them, and then you also and that kind of precludes you from kind of going for that kind of Bruno slash Son tier asset because you also have the money in the midfield. So that's kind of the situation you find yourself in. And I feel like the person who's paid the price, in a sense, is Livermento, who probably produces nothing for you. And if you want to go big at the back, for example, I mean, there's also an opportunity for you to go Doherty as well to cover Spurs, because you have the price to go to Doherty, and it's a nice transfer to make. But as I said, I think Vardy has to go just because he's not playing, and I can't see what's the point in really holding up that sort of money. Gunnar, so currently trailing in your mini league, you have 2.4 in the bank, and only my bench boost left. Was wondering what moves would I make if I were you? This week I would actually roll, honestly, my friend, because the whole point is that De Gea will double in the next week. The rest of your team, you can actually make a transfer out of out of Rafinha next week into someone like Madison, and you can go for the Leicester double up, which I think will be quite exciting. And then you can also maybe make a move away from Cody if you'd like, in terms of going for someone like Fabian Schär. But one thing that worries me as well is you need to find some time to actually put someone like Trent or a Liverpool defender in your team. And I think after game week 33, looking towards a Liverpool defender would be a good option for you. Because even though there's some short-term upside in terms of, let's say, going out of Rafinha and maybe rolling the transfer this week, you should be looking towards capitalizing 33, and after that, looking towards balancing your team with players from better teams. And for example, getting rid of Tierney would be a good idea. I wouldn't go for another Arsenal defender. I'd actually probably move towards, as I said, making sure that Tierney can be moved towards a Liverpool player. I kind of agree with you. But I mean, I feel like it's a bit of a weird thing to say that Son won't be that good. I think Son has been one of the most interesting assets in the league in terms of his value for money recently. I agree with the point on Madison and Coutinho. I feel like they could easily replace the spot in your team that's sitting with Cornet as an example. But just kind of thinking about, let's say, the consistency of the returns from someone like Son in a high goal scoring team like Spurs, I feel like then if we're really talking about players that you'd rather have to get Madison and Coutinho, I think Mount is someone who could clearly make way, because it's not like Mount's been producing at all. So if we go to Mount, for example, I mean, Mount has pretty much been a little bit negligible, with exception for that Norwich game, and we've seen Son be almost equally as explosive in most matches, right? So if we look at Son, obviously there's a price difference, but the whole point is that you're still storing a lot of money in Vardy for no reason. So Son has been very consistent, already two back-to-back kind of double-digit hauls. Yes, two blanks here, but even when we look at Mount, I mean, going back towards 18, there were a lot of weeks where he had subs, like kind of multiple blanks, and Son's completely different in my opinion. So I think either you find a way to, let's say, push Vardy up into Kane and then maybe reduce someone else into, let's say, a Madison Coutinho, and cover yourself that way, because I think you have to sort of just back the teams that are in form. And I feel like covering at least one or two Spurs players is a good idea. Ultimately, this Chelsea side do have good fixtures, and they have a lot of fixtures themselves. Um, but I think, for example, James and Rudiger is sometimes arguably good enough coverage for those players, or that team rather. And then, yeah, just moving that money to Vardy gives you another asset somewhere in the field. So yeah, you could roll this week, because I think Cornet, he could be a good transfer this week. I mean, I'm trying to think about who you'd actually feel this week. So you're gonna play probably Salah presumably, and then go for Trent, James, Rodrigo, Cancelo. You're back four. I'm not. Yeah, and then Rafinha for me has a great game versus Watford. I would say it's comparable to Cornet versus Norwich. And then you have Salah, Mount, Martinelli, Foden, another great sort of front line, and then Richarlison plays as your sole forward, which you're happy to have. Yeah, I think you're in a good position to play a 4-5-1 this week with Rafinha, and then you just kind of roll that transfer. So I would much prefer that move. And then, as you mentioned, you can go from Madison next week, and then go for Coutinho in the near future. But as I said, a Spurs asset will be quite interesting. I think 33 onwards, because the only week where Spurs have a tough week, right, is going to be 36, because Liverpool and Arsenal are going to be tough games. I can see Son scoring in the Arsenal game for sure. Liverpool game, maybe not so confident about that. Um, I'm sure the Spurs team will actually give a valiant effort versus both Liverpool and Arsenal. But that's maybe the one week where you'd think about, just because the doubles are so good across the board, you might want to not go triple Spurs. And therefore, for example, someone in my position where I have triple Spurs, I would just like to free hit in this week, really. Who would I start between Weghorst and Cancelo? I'd go for Cancelo, honestly. And I probably wouldn't go for the Mateta move until 34. Um, Hey Fran, but is this the right bench order? Good luck for this game week. Thanks, Henry. I'd still Kane captain, but I think that's a nice bench order. Who am I captaining? I'm going for a Sun captaincy. So I'm going to answer some YouTube comments as we head towards the last sort of 10-13 minutes. Someone says they want to sell Tierney and Coutinho, but you don't know who to buy. I think I've responded to that. Sorry. So thoughts about Newcastle? Yep, responded to that. Hi, Frank. Glad you're back. Thanks, Mark. Thinking of the big Hunas move, Madison for Salah, CR7 for Weghorst. Great moves, actually. I mean, one of the problems that, for example, Weghorst presents in my team clearly is that, I mean, I don't want to play him whatsoever. And being able to go towards an option such as Kane or Son, I think is very beneficial. So I can completely back the move towards going for the -4. And if you're happy to go without Salah, I mean, that's fair enough. I don't have the same kahunas, so that's sort of the move. Should I replace Romero with Doherty or save the transfer? I do think replacing Romero with Doherty is actually worth it. I think over time that transfer will pay off, and the sooner you do that move, the better it is. I think it's a little bit different, for example, comparing it to Rudiger and James, just because Rudiger is such an aerial threat. Salah to Bruno, chasing your mini league, risk it for the biscuit. I think that's a very, very logical move, Rory, and definitely a move that I would think about if you were chasing. I wouldn't actually criticize anyone for going out of Salah, because simply put, I mean, it's true that his form has dipped a little bit lately, and that's completely fine. But he is extremely high priced in this game, and Bruno is still a very, very capable top player. Ultimately, last season we were pretty much juggling between Salah and Bruno for captaincies all year round, and Bruno is someone who can deliver. That's fine. I think Schmeichel's a logical move too, and especially, I mean, if you're going for doublers and you're taking hits through him, I think it's very logical. Okay, in between Weg and Mateta, I think Mateta. Honestly, I just am not a fan of Weghorst whatsoever, guys. He's looked terrible, and if we look at the underlying stats too, for the previous game, so this is a website called Understat. If we look at Burnley as an example, so Burnley scored 3 goals, and the expected goals of Weghorst was 0.02 for a forward from a team who scored 3 goals. That couldn't be any worse. Genuinely, couldn't be any worse. So that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in. James and Barnes on your mind. Wildcard one is better for the long term, and if you have other suggestion, James and Barnes. Yep, that's logical. I personally gone out of Tierney myself, but I think going out of Van Dijk into James makes sense. Um, Absolutely like those moves. Honestly, I mean, this is gonna be a huge differential, Jerome. But I definitely back it. Reece James is an exceptional player. Are you underestimating Gordon slash Cass possible points this week? Sorry. So tired of Weghorst, but most of my mini league are still stuck with him, so don't want to miss out. Yeah, you could play with EO. I think you could play with EO. I think yeah, you can go for the safe play and going for Weghorst because I really can't see Gordon and Cash contributing too much. I might be wrong, but simply put, the Spurs team very capable of scoring goals, so I don't see the clean sheet points for Cash. As far as Gordon, I mean, yes, Man United are a little bit leaky at the back, but this Everton side just don't really inspire me whatsoever. Much in the same way that Weghorst doesn't. And I agree. You know, Weghorst, for example, could find himself towards getting a jammy penalty. And I don't really know exactly who the penalty taker is for Burnley because I think Weghorst hasn't taken one yet. But he could find himself, for example, getting a penalty potentially. Jimenez out for whom? I think Mateta's a good move. Pookie's a good move as well. Who do you bench? Barnes, White, or Rudiger? I'd probably bench White, to be quite honest. Wasn't very confident in Arsenal last week post injuries in terms of how they will kind of walk towards the end of the season. Missing Partey, missing Tierney, and missing Tomiyasu still is huge. I was actually thinking earlier today, actually, before I actually went out of Tierney into Reece James, I was actually thinking about dropping Dennis and dropping Salah to go into Ronaldo and captaining Ronaldo versus Everton. Because that would have given me quite a lot of money to play around with, and that clearly could just be someone like Osaka, for example. Um, I'm not gonna go for a -8, but I really like I really like the upside of that move just because worst case scenario, Ronaldo could be someone like Kane in the future if I drop Kudushevsky and maybe move him into another player. Um, but Kane, I think, might be a little bit out of reach now. Actually, he's still within reach, so I still have the money for that. But then someone has to still make way. Someone, for example, like Van Dijk, will have to move into another asset. Rudiger, for example, could make way eventually for Van Dijk, and then Kulusevski could be pushed into eventually someone like a Coutinho type asset if Rafinha goes out of my team as well. So that's entirely possible. But yeah, I mean, I kind of decided against it mostly because I don't exactly know what the situation is with United and Ronaldo and why he's sort of missed as many games as he has. They haven't really been extremely forthcoming with his injury news, and I feel like it's a bit of a gamble as someone who doesn't have a wild card in 34 to go for Ronaldo in the first place, even though I actually think he probably might have the best upside for the next 2 weeks. Ultimately, you'd love to be a centre forward playing versus Everton and Norwich. So these are great games to have, and then maybe I can just transfer him out as I mentioned. But then the weird thing is too is Son has basically provided such great value for money in recent weeks where I can't see myself, going towards Ronaldo, and then switching Son for Kane because I feel like I was very against moving Son for Kane, and I kind of benefited from it in last week, right? By holding on to Son. A lot of people made moves towards Kane because Kane was the one scoring 2 weeks ago, but variance happens, and Son has found himself to be on the better half in the last 2 weeks. So it's a weird situation there, and I feel like I'm kind of reproducing that move, which is why I didn't actually go for the Ronaldo move at the end. Given that I'm actually now playing with this sort of line of play where I have Rafinha still on my team, it's clear that Rafinha will make way next week for Saka. He's someone who's been eluding my team, and Van Dijk will probably have to make way as well. So I'm looking towards maybe bringing Saka and maybe someone like Shar in the meantime. But I'll have a think about that too. It's also possible that I just simply make another forward move too, because next week the one concern for me is that the forwards don't really have good fixtures whatsoever. I mean, Leicester, I don't really want to bank on Iheanacho whatsoever. Burnley, Weghorst has really depressed me. The one thing that I do like actually is that Broja might have two good fixtures, and he's just gotten rested from the Chelsea game. So that's kind of like a little bit of a plus for me to keep Broja in my team and actually play him over Weghorst. I'll see how, Weghorst performs once again, but I've watched him for quite a few weeks now, and I think he's putting me into a state of depression. So it's really hard to kind of see how Weghorst fits in my team. He'll probably have to go soon. And that's kind of the situation I find myself in with Newcastle Crystal Palace. I mean, it's a good game for Mateta, and he's definitely found himself to be the starting striker. But another thing that slightly worries me about Mateta is, Vieira still finds plenty of opportunities to bench him. And yes, Mateta has found his way onto the score sheet actually quite consistently. I mean, he's scored pretty much every other odd week since he's gotten consistent minutes, barring this game here. But there's still opportunities, as you can see, where he gets substituted off at 64, 68 minutes. And sometimes you just want to have a forward who plays a little bit more consistently. Weghorst is also playing himself into a similar situation where you can see when he started with Burnley, he was playing much more consistent minutes. And then recently has been playing, I mean, this was the key game where I thought he had a very poor performance versus Brentford. But also Brentford have a lot of big men and were quite comfortable in dealing with Weghorst. So I think Sean Dyche wanted to change the style of play in this game. But yeah, very, very unlively player so far, Weghorst, and he probably would be someone I would like to make way as well next week, maybe if I can find an opportunity to move into another forward, if there's an option that comes up. But because Crystal Palace don't double, doesn't seem like it's worth it. I might have to just move Van Dijk into someone who does double next week, which would probably mean that I would be living with Schär for a while, potentially. That's an opportunity. And keep wise, I think a lot of people have been also thinking about Schmeichel. I could also move in the future to go out of Ramsdale to Schmeichel, just because Schmeichel does double in the future, and that's going to be a huge little benefit if you are someone who's going for Leicester players. This fixture, for example, I would love to have Schmeichel versus Everton and Norwich, but both these teams have been relatively, unenthusing from the kind of attacking point of view, and then you potentially get another set of doubles here with Schmeichel, and for me, that's a good time to maybe move away from Arsenal. Arsenal do also have an okay-ish double just because they played Leeds for one of the games. But yeah, I mean, I might have to make a decision between Ramsdale and Schmeichel. Schmeichel has kind of found himself to be at a good price. But the clean sheet points haven't been great because Leicester have constantly been rotating. They also play in Europe. And that's kind of one thing that I think does hamper some teams, where if you have constant rotation and you don't actually have kind of a defined back four, where you can see, for example, week on week they change their fullbacks, that does kind of hamper your ability to keep clean sheets. It's not like a team like Man City where you can just slot in, slot out someone like a John Stones or Nathan Ake, and they can still keep clean sheets. I think Leicester are a little bit off the mark. As far as the YouTube comments, who do I bench? White, Barnes, White, or Rudiger? As I said, I think you bench White. Bench Doherty or Martinelli? I'd probably bench Martinelli. I know Doherty has less lower points, but I think all algorithms always struggle to deal with defenders. So you're always going to see that Martinelli will outscore Doherty on predicted points because defenders aren't visualized to do well. But as we know, watching, for example, Conte and his style of football, fullbacks are very, very involved, and you have to kind of take into account that fact. Jake Easton says, hey, Fran, who to bench? Trent, Cancelo, or Doherty? I think you want to bench... That's a tough one there. I'd try to play all three of them. But I would probably bench Trent. It's tough. Quick question. Who would you start of Cody, Dennis, and Laporte? I'd probably start Cody. 3 minutes left. Make sure that you lock. Yeah, absolutely, guys. Make your transfers, please. Dexter, you got a bench boost 36. Your confusion is who should be your third attack in 36. First attack, Kane. Second, Laka or Richarlison. Third, who? I think you want to go for someone like Pookie or Mateta. Who am I captain? I'm going for Son captain. And yeah, that's going to be my transfers this week. I went for Reece James this week and dropped Tierney. I was also thinking about my bench being extremely thin. A little bit worried about that, especially last week where I had, 2 players benched. We'll see what happens. Hopefully no last minute injuries, and at least Van Dijk can slot in if there is one. So yeah, that's kind of the situation I find myself in. Hope you guys have a wonderful week as well. Please lock in your transfers. Just 1 minute left. Bench Jacob Ramsey or Daniel Marte? I'd probably bench Ramsey. Thank you so much, Blair. Yeah, I try to be a machine, hopefully. But it was nice actually to kind of have like a smaller chat, and me being able to sort of respond to questions in a timely manner. So it was really nice to have you guys on. Thank you guys so much. I'm probably gonna hop off now, just to actually enjoy the evening. But yeah, that's it for me, guys. Hope you guys have a lovely weekend ahead and a lovely game week with hopefully a green arrow.